Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Is it audible now? Okay. Leave it on? Okay.
Okay. Morde.
The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Let us pray for this day. Almighty and everlasting God, in whom we live and move and have our being, we, your needy creatures, render you our humble praises for your preservation of us from the beginning of our lives to this day, and for all your mercies we bless and magnify your glorious name. Let us pray for the Church. Heavenly Father, we rejoice that you sent to us, your Church, your Holy Spirit to be with us forever. We thank you for your generosity and ask your further help in recognizing him in today's world. Help us to hear and heed him when he speaks to us quietly amidst the clamor being made by the strong, the powerful, the rich, and the influential. Help us to be the voice of the poor, the weak, the victim, and the voiceless. Let us pray for the world. Lord God, at our creation, you said that it is not good for us to be alone. We thank you for the gift of procreation, for the blessings of family, and we pray that we would have the wisdom and the steadfastness to nurture all our relationships. We pray for all the people of our world, including ourselves, that we may be saved from selfishness, insularity, and greed in our dealings with one another and with other nationals living among us. Let us give God thanks for our presenters and our moderator, for this ministry of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action and its trustees, patron, and visitor, for all organizers and participants of this evening's discussion, and for the opportunity of being here. Let us pray that God's Holy Spirit will guide this evening's discussion, that all that is said and done be done to his glory. And now we sum up all our prayers in the words our Savior himself has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The peace of God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and the love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among us and remain with us forevermore. Amen.
Good evening to everyone, to all here assembled, and to all those who shall be part of the experience online. As chairman of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, I am delighted to have this opportunity to welcome you here this evening in the cathedral and those who are online to this, our festival forum. The festival forum is associated with the St. Michael's Cathedral Patronal Festival, normally held at the end of September, but the forum is set depending on several other set of circumstances. And so here we are in November. Perhaps this is particularly useful because the forum generally helps us to focus on something of national interest. And this year's topic, I think, is particularly interesting from that point of view. The St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, in keeping with one of the visions of cathedrals, identifies the opportunity to provide responsible reasoning, responsible discussion fora for the general public and allow the church to have the opportunity to engage with professional persons on matters of national interest, some personal, some social, and indeed some particularly associated with religion. This forum here tonight is in keeping with several others hosted, the first one being held in September of 2017, when the topic was Christianity, same-sex relationships, and social justice and human rights, or not. Christianity and the challenges of interpreting sexual and reproductive health rights. Then the following year, in September, the focus was on good governance. In 2019, we addressed the topic, our changing climate, implications for hurricanes and other dangerous hazards. The COVID-19 pandemic was the focus of the 2020 forum. And the topic then was COVID-19 and the church, looking at congregational responses and socio-economic impact of COVID. In 2021, we continued the COVID focus with the theme, Church Unusual, whosoever can will come. COVID-19 challenges, changes. And this particular one was done via Zoom. And we were privileged at that time to have as a presenter the Right Reverend Mark Eddington, Bishop of the Convocation of the Episcopal Churches in Europe, and editor of the book, We Shall Be Changed. With the exception of Bishop Eddington, all the other contributors were associated with the University of the West Indies in one way or the other. And so the center is indebted to the University of the West Indies, the Cave Hill campus, Salacis, and other faculties were providing us with resources to inform the thinking of the center and no doubt influencing the thinking of the church. We meet this evening under the theme, Populate or Perish, Barbados population today and tomorrow. And we're going to be relying upon the University of the West Indies to provide us with two of the presenters, and a graduate of the university to be part of that exercise. They will be introduced formally in a few minutes. But just permit me to say how satisfied I am that we were able to attract such persons of distinguished scholarship and social responsibility to make themselves available for this presentation. It was earlier this year, in February, that there was a report presented by the Commission on Population in Barbados. And that is what has influenced the center in considering a topic for tonight. We have gone a long way since we took the biblical injunction, increase and multiply. And we have seen the good work of the Barbados Family Planning Association, how we have been able to manage our birth rate and to keep it consistent with our capacity to supply the needs of the children we give birth to. I believe we have reached a point now where we are looking at it from a slightly different angle, where now we have to look at population from the point of view of the population's capacity to sustain development and to further a better life for our people. That, I believe, will be the essence of tonight's discussion. And we shall hear from an economist, from a medical perspective, from a sociological perspective, and we as Christians will have every opportunity to have our input, to do our theological reflection on them. That is how social ethics and how social policy from a point of view of theological ethics is done. We hear from the experts, we take a step back, and we can reflect theologically on the same. So with these few words, I again welcome all to this session and look forward very much to the dialogue which shall ensue. I now invite Ms. Kathy Ann Waif Gibson to introduce the presenters and moderator.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The pleasure is mine this evening to introduce our panelists for this evening's forum. And I'm going to start with the ladies. Ladies first. Dr. Keerti Singh. Dr. Keerti Singh is a senior lecturer in anatomy and currently the MBBS Phase 1 coordinator at the Department of Preclinical and Health Sciences, Faculty of Medical Sciences, UWI, Keerti, Barbados. She is a visiting professor at Sri Balahai Medical College and Hospital, Chennai, India. Dr. Singh is also a review editor of the journal Frontiers in Public Health and Promotion. She is the handling editor of the journal Frontiers in Psychology. She is an honorary fellow of the Global Association of Physicians of Indian origin. She was trained in infertility workup from the Cleveland Clinic, USA. She is an active researcher of Team 3 of the Global Andrology Forum. She is an optimist and serves as the current district chair of College Clubs, Optimist International Caribbean District, and is the Barbados representative of the Optimist International Childhood Health and Response Mission CHARM Committee. She is also a member of numerous professional organizations, including the American and British Association of Clinical Anatomists, ESHRE and ISAR, and holds leadership roles in the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, and in Optimist International. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Keerti Singh. Our second presenter is Dr. Troy Lorde. Professor Troy Lorde is a professor of tourism economics and dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies, Griffith campus. He completed a BSc Economics and Accounting at the UWI, an MA Economics at York University, Canada, and his PhD in Economics, specialization in tourism, from the University of Surrey in the UK. Professor Lorde has taught many courses over the years at the undergraduate and graduate levels, including supervision of several MPhil and PhD students. His teaching and mentoring have been recognized by the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and the Guild of Students for outstanding contribution to student learning. Professor Lorde's main research interests are in the fields of international tourism, tourism demand, and international trade. He has published 55 papers and book chapters in peer-reviewed journals, prepared 7 technical reports, and presented papers at 47 conferences. The professor has also received numerous research grants and awards from the UWI, including the prestigious Principals Award for Excellence in Research, the Campus Award for Best Collaborative Research, and Campus Award for recognition of researchers/research teams who have won significant funding. According to Research Papers in Economics, a central index of economics research, Dr. Lorde is currently ranked in the top 10% of researchers in Central America and the Caribbean, and the top 14% in Latin America and the Caribbean. He currently serves as Deputy Chairman of the Agricultural Development Fund and Deputy Chairman of the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation, both in the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, and as a member of the Minimum Wage Board in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security Relations. He is a member of the Conference of the Latin American Network for Research on Services Academic Committee, a member of the International Association of Tourism Economics, and formerly a member of the Commonwealth Specialist Pool of Consultants on Small States and Climate Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Troy Lorde. Our third presenter is Mr. George Griffith. Mr. George Griffith hails from Marley Vale, St. Philip, and now resides at East Ridge, St. Catherine, St. Philip, with his wife, Tamisha Williams Griffith. He was educated at St. Catherine's Mixed School, Barbados School of Nursing, Social Welfare Training Center in Mona, Jamaica, the University of the West Indies, Mona, and New York University, USA. Mr. Griffith has a BSc in Social Work with a concentration on Medical and Psychiatric Social Work from UWI, Mona, a Master of Science, Management, International Public Service Organization. He has been awarded the CBE, the Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, in 2019, the SCM, the Silver Crown of Merit, in 1996. He is a Justice of the Peace since 1984. He's a former senator, a former consul general, a former executive director of the Barbados Family Planning Association from 1995 to 2015. He currently holds the position of coordinator for the Community Elder Care Program. He's the chairman of the Family Life Commission, chairman of the Task Force on Homelessness, the chairman of the Board of Management, Grantley Adams School. He is the father of Rochelle and Ricardo Griffith, and the grandfather of Joshua, Tyler, and Amani. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Griffith. I now introduce our moderator, who says he needs no introduction, no long introduction, no bio. We all know his distinctive voice. We would see him on television and hear him. He says he wants to be introduced as a man who is interested in everything Bajan. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sherwood McCaskie, our moderator for this evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, here we are. Well, thank you very much. I will begin this evening by echoing the sentiment expressed by Senator the Reverend Charles Morris today when he commended the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action for being responsive to the needs of the people and engaging in something from which we can generate some information to pass on to the government to help them make decisions. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, as you have heard from Mrs. With Gibson, we have carefully empaneled a group of 3 esteemed individuals because of their research, their interests in the topic, and no doubt their personal conviction that is something that requires urgent attention. So I'm going to invite all 3 of them to join me here on this elevated area. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. See. This evening's discussion will take the form of 3 presentations. Each will be 20 minutes in duration, and that will be followed by question and answers. Of course, your active participation is welcomed and encouraged. We will get to that after the presentations. I'm going to begin, first of all, with Professor Lorde. Professor?
Good night to all. First, I want to thank Sharianne for reaching out to me to participate in this very important series of panel discussions, and I also want to thank the Reverend Dr. Gibson for also, agreeing for us here at the University of West Indies. He didn't mention us, so I have to thank him for that shout out. So I'll jump right in. 20 minutes is a long time. So first, the topic is populate or perish. Now, they say I'm an economist, maybe originally, but I consider myself more social scientist these days. I don't get to do much research because I'm the dean of the faculty, a very administrative position. Nonetheless, what we would tend to do in social sciences as a social scientist, the first thing we would do with a topic is to do what we would say is to unpack it. It says populate or perish. Now, this is, in some ways that tag, populate or perish, is synonymous with what we were doing, speak about in academia, is publish or perish, which is you got to publish or soon you'll be looking for a job, right? So there's a certain, I would say juxtaposition or nexus between this topic and what we are typically familiar with as academics. Nonetheless, so when I did a little digging, the phrase populate or perish was historically used to emphasize the importance of population growth for a nation's survival, development, and economic stability. And it's apparently attributed to Australian post-World War II policies because they were trying to increase their population in order to increase, economic growth. Nonetheless, apart from that historical framing, I will say the phrase population or perish, it has been criticized for oversimplifying, though, that relationship between population size and survival. So, I'll just say that. We do have some examples of countries that are not very populated, but are thriving, like Switzerland and Singapore, and for reasons like governance, innovation, and so forth. Now, circling back to the lens through which I was asked to respond to the topic, populate or perish, I was asked to speak about the relationship between population size and sustainability. Now, what I'm going to do, because these are very broad, population size and sustainability, I'm going to have to narrow down the focus in order to really do justice to what I was asked to speak about. And so what I'm going to look at is an intersection between population aging and population shrinking. So I'm going to look at the relationship between an aging and shrinking population and sustainability. So aging and shrinking, which ties back to the whole concept of population size, I'm going to link it to sustainability. Now, sustainability is a very, very broad concept. So we have different meanings in economics, it has different meanings in science, but in general, what I'm going to speak about here, so that again I can answer the question, is to narrow down the concept of sustainability to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, okay? So I'm going to link population aging, shrinking populations to the Sustainable Development Goals. All right, so first, well, I'll give you a frame for how I'm going to do this. So I'm going to speak to a number of things, and I'm going to try to link them to a number of Sustainable Development Goals. I'll say the number and I'll say the name so you can understand how I'm going to be looking at this, all right? So the first thing, in terms of the interface between aging and sustainability, is that older populations experience specific challenges related to health, safety, the ability to respond to disasters, vulnerability to diseases and pandemics, mobility, and a number of other challenges. And we saw that a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, there were so many things that the COVID-19 pandemic revealed for all of us, but in particular, as it relates to a population that is aging and shrinking, you know, there are a number of challenges that will pose for meeting many of these Sustainable Development Goals, okay? So the way I'm going to address this is I'm going to focus on 12 specific Sustainable Development Goals to basically try to make the relationship as clear as I can between an aging and shrinking population and sustainability. So I'm going to divide this into 3 thematic areas, the biosphere, society, and the economy. Sherwood, give me some time checks. Give me some time checks every few minutes. All right, good. All right, good. So the first one I'm going to speak about is the biosphere-related SDGs. So the first thing is that you expect aging and shrinking populations, and Barbados is such a society. We saw that in the 2010 census, we had about 287,000 was our population, and in 2021, that number is 267,000. So we had a decline of 20,000. I mean, it grows and it declines, but this is an issue. When I was a child, I remember in primary school, in 1980, they told me the population was 250,000. And here, only many, many years later, 30-something, 40-something years later, the population has hardly grown, right? And these are the challenges. So what we are going to speak about here now, the first one I'm speaking about, the biosphere. So here are the goals I'm talking about when I speak about the biosphere. SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation. SDG 14, which is life underwater. SDG 15, which is life on land. And SDG 13, which is climate action. So what we have found is that when we look at aging and shrinking populations, there's going to be some benefit to the biodiversity and so forth, because, you know, the larger the population is, the more pressures we place on our ability to eat, to consume, environmental pressures. The thing is that but the aging shrinking population, speaking in Barbados, I mean, there's other things I'm going to speak to, of course, but what you will find perhaps is that lower consumption rates may actually reduce pressures on Barbados to feed itself, to do certain things. Now, there are real opportunities for meeting targets such as SDG 15.1, conservation, restoration, sustainable use of terrestrial and inland freshwater systems, universal and equitable access to life. So on one hand, I mean, this is what a shrinking population can mean for the biosphere, which is that there are less pressures on the country to be able to meet, you know, the needs to feed itself. There's going to be less pressure on certain services on one hand, but as you will see as I continue to go through my points, you know, there are certain trade-offs that we will face. So aging is going to meet or create constraints for meeting SDG 13, which is climate action, right? Now, what we found, and I said it before, elderly persons are more vulnerable to climate extremes and disasters, okay? They're more sensitive to things like very extreme changes in heat and cold. So that vulnerability actually means then that the response in terms of the infrastructures that we have to put in place, because we will have to, there's a certain cost. They're more susceptible to natural disasters. What we found, certainly when we look at our climate change, events, there's an increasing frequency of certain types of events. and the elderly are going to be more vulnerable to such extremes than, say, a younger population, and they're also less able to respond because of their vulnerability. That's the biosphere. Now let me talk a little bit about the society-related SDGs. So, definitely, and this one should be fairly linearly understood, there's going to be a challenge with an aging and shrinking population in relation to meeting SDG 3, good health and well-being, okay? Healthy aging would require the maintenance of functional ability through a person's lifespan, but as I mentioned before, the elderly are more vulnerable to environmental stressors and disasters. And why did I focus, I just say as an aside, on the aging population is because when it comes to our ability, well, right now the way in which we function in terms of providing for the elderly is that those that are working, our contributions are used to provide the pensions of the persons that are retired. Now, a typical population pyramid is a triangle, small at the top, wide at the bottom. But Barbados' pyramid is going the other way. It's going where it's going to be wide at the top and small at the bottom. So we have something called the dependency ratio. In 2022, our dependency ratio was just over 49%. That's a World Bank World Development Indicator figure. In 2023, that went over 50%. So what it basically means then is that the percentage of dependents in Barbados' population now exceeds the working age population. You understand what I'm saying? It's 50-something%. I'll give the number. I wrote it down somewhere on this slide. It's over 50%. So we have more dependents, those that are younger than 15 and older than 64 as a percent of the working age population. So what that basically means, even if we just maintain our level of benefits at the rate where they are now, because that dependency ratio is growing, the contributions that we would have to make either in terms of the amounts we come out of our salaries a month in terms of national insurance, for example, will either have to go up, which of course is not a palatable thing for those that are working, and by extension, or which is even worse for a lot of persons, you saw a lot of pushback on this, the retirement age would have to increase, none of which is palatable for most persons. But I'm just mentioning that when I'm speaking about why I've decided to focus on this aspect. We are aging and shrinking. It's a double whammy, okay? So, Sherwood, how much time? Have 10 minutes? Okay, good, great. I don't want to be feeling like I'm rushed, sorry. What we will find, I'm speaking about society-related SDGs as well. Aging is going to perhaps reinforce certain inequalities. So there's SDG 1, no poverty, and social protection. I kind of spoke about social protection a little bit there just now. But one of the things that exists is that elderly people, for obvious reasons, have a lower participation in employment. I mean, you've worked for a long time, when you reach retirement age, whether that's early or let's say the full, you want to do things that are what you call more relaxed and more leisurely. But the challenges with lower participation rate in employment also means there's lower contribution rates. And there's a thing which is problematic in some ways. I mean, some people want to retire, but older people also have a wealth of knowledge and experience. And when they retire, that goes. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that they have that is lost unless they're able to return and make those sort of contributions, right? So we know that, yes, you work long and hard and you want to retire, but at the same time, I assure you, society still needs these persons. We're not saying we want to work you hard, or we're not saying to do a lot of heavy labor, but what we're talking about is your knowledge, your experience. Those skills are lost if you leave the labor force and, persons coming up behind them, unless there's, a proper way for them to transition into the roles and posts that you have, that is lost to society. That actually has a serious economic impact. I'm going to jump here now. I'm going to speak specifically now to economy-related SDGs. So, SDG 8 is decent work and economic growth. SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So, I already mentioned the age dependency ratio. It's 50.23% in 2023. Now, what that does is it creates fiscal pressures on developing and maintaining public health care, our pensions, our infrastructure, and our social protection, all right? Now, even as I mentioned these things, conversely, on the other hand, aging and shrinking populations provide opportunities for SDG 12, sustainable production and consumption. Older persons on this side of things, especially when it relates to consumption, they put less pressure on our ability to create consumption or in terms of consumption pressures in any particular country. And the case is just really that they tend to, because they're not consuming it, don't just mean food, I mean in terms of the fact that they tend to do things that are usually localized. They don't drive around as much, they tend to do things that are less resource intensive. And so there's an opportunity then when we speak about SDG 12, sustainable production and consumption. That's one, I would say, plus in terms of a population that is aging. But overall, on balance, we recognize that an aging, shrinking population creates fiscal pressures for small countries that is particularly problematic because of the nature of our economy in Barbados and so many other Caribbean countries, is that, you know, there's not, in terms of the suggestions you've heard, I wrote an article, I remember in the paper a few weeks ago about inward migration. Many of the suggestions for how we could reverse that instead of having a shrinking population, none of them appear to be there's a lot of pushback on that. Inward migration, you know, the challenges associated with that, the cultural assimilation and the challenge of, you know, bringing in persons from outside the region. There's the issue of asking persons to have more children, and I read a lot of the comments in the press and otherwise, and patients will say, well, how am I going to feed them? The options are not very, very many. But in terms of some of the things that I will just end on here, Chair, in terms of some of the ways in which we can capitalize on opportunities and reduce challenges. And these are things that we will have to consider, not necessarily only endemic or indigenous to Barbados, but we're going to have to look outside. And one, to boost innovation for healthcare and mobility. I mean, we still have to confront the fact that we're an aging society. And so you have to think of innovations to help those that are elderly and those that are going to become elderly in the next 10 to 20 years. And so where the world has gone is that they're starting to include what we call socially assistive robots. AI services for healthcare, innovations for house-based healthcare, digital nursing, and so forth. The COVID pandemic did present many, many challenges, but then it also opened up our eyes to the sort of things we can do in a remote way. So innovation for healthcare and mobility is going to be important. You have to increase the extent and improve the design of green spaces. Our aging population is going to benefit from a lot of outdoor activity, right? This is always something that we're going to recommend. So we want to do more greening. We have urban designs that have to rethink the possibility of making themselves less concrete jungles and more green. And then finally, where I'm going to land, is we have to improve social inclusion. I think Barbados does pretty well here, to be quite frank. I mentioned we want to tap into that rich wealth of knowledge and experience and skills that elderly persons have, but we want to give them a lot more opportunities to volunteer, to basically come and mentor a lot of young persons. We believe that doing things like that, that sort of activity, is actually going to enhance the availability and variety of the sort of opportunities available to the rest of the country. So I will end there, Sherwood, but I will say this to just wrap up. The focus on aging and shrinking and sustainability, yes. But now, if we think about I'm going back to the moot, to populate or perish, the answer for this particular conundrum Barbados finds itself in is not simply to increase the population. It's a very simplistic answer. The truth, though, is that when it comes to what sort of options we have, it's going to be a multi-dimensional or multifaceted response. Yes, in the long run, certainly we do have to increase our population growth rates. It is below the replacement rate of 2.1 at present. And so yes, if we don't, the country will perish. But that's a long-run answer. Even if persons were to start having more children right now, these persons cannot contribute to society in a meaningful way until a generation later. But it is still something we have to think about. Persons said they would like the government to give them some sort of assistance. I mean, governments, there's several governments across the world doing this, Chair. But it's certainly never going to be the level that persons would be able to, in their minds, be able to comfortably do it. So we have to think about ways in which this can happen without increasing the burdens on the person's financial ability to support a child. Inward migration is a hot topic, but it's very controversial because persons like to think of their country as theirs. So Barbados is for Barbadians. You know what I mean? Even if some persons come to work, in their minds, they perhaps, I don't want to say should go bad. I don't want to make it sound so bad, but you understand. It's not xenophobia. It is just a certain sort of natural response to these sort of suggestions. But anyway, Chair, I thank you and I yield.
Thank you very much, Professor Lorde. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will go directly to Mr. Griffith, a very experienced social worker, a man who has dedicated his life to helping others. Mr. Griffith preferred to speak from the lectern. Go right ahead. Good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I take this early opportunity to thank the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action for inviting me to participate in what promises to be a most exciting, informative, and invigorating forum. This center, a registered charity since the year 2017, has committed itself to the advancement of public education, religion, the promotion of purposes beneficial to the community, and the relief of poverty. This, in my view, is precisely the community outreach ministry which is so desperately needed at this period of our history. And for this, I highly commend the very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Gibson and his team for their leadership in this regard. Tonight's topic for discussion is Populate or Perish. Barbados' population today and tomorrow is as thought-provoking as it is provocative. I was asked to specifically focus on the responsibility of individuals in the reproductive cycle, and I interpret this to mean the reproductive age grouping. As most of you might know, I have had the honor of being part of the management team of the Barbados Family Planning Association for the greater part of 23 years and served as its longest-serving executive director. Those were, to a large extent, and in my view, one of the most transformative periods in the history of the organization since its founding in 1954 by an act of Parliament. In those days, birth control was synonymous with the term family planning and was seen as one of the major priorities. Over time, and surely by the time of my appointment, the mission had undergone considerable change from birth control to sexual and reproductive health and rights. The key component of sexual and reproductive health and rights is based on the recognition of the fundamental rights and freedoms of all people, as well as respect for their intrinsic worth and dignity. These are embedded in the principle of the right to self-determination. I am painstakingly seeking to place the subject in its proper context because it has been grossly misunderstood over the years and continues to this present time, even though its outstanding record of achievement speaks for itself. Some persons present might remember that at no less a place than on the floor of Parliament, it was boldly stated and with much conviction that the BFPA was too successful over the years of its operations. Some persons erroneously interpret that as saying that responsibility for the receding population growth rate should be placed clearly on the doorstep of the organization. In today's scheme of things, any attempt at a meaningful discussion on reversing today's population trends must take into consideration the circumstances, historical, social, and political, which have brought us as a nation to the point where negative population growth is our reality. The responsibility of individuals during their reproductive cycle, or put differently, during their reproductive years, cannot be seen in isolation. It must take into consideration those predisposing factors which have so fundamentally influenced our male-female relationships and have given rise to the reduction in births and, by extension, decline in population trends which have become today's norm. As most of you ought to know, attitude and behavior change takes time, and especially in circumstances where those persons who are required to make the change are neither readily convinced or convincible that the stated changes are necessarily in their best interests. In other words, the question, what is in it for me personally, must be answered. Stories of the so-called good old days are still being handed down from generation to generation, and the perception which has taken root over the years is that large families are not the in thing. Let me make it absolutely clear that I fully understand and support the economics of the urgent need to expand our country's population. I also believe that persons within the well-recognized 15 to 49 reproductive group are central to the success of any policy or program aimed at restoring population growth, and which can only succeed with their wholehearted buy-in. We must not forget that when this country's growth rate was galloping along in the late 1940s and the early 1950s at 34 births per thousand, the infant mortality rate was 136 births per thousand. In addition, maternal morbidity and mortality was quite high. These factors were instrumental in helping to shape and indeed fashion the apparent aversion to multiple pregnancies and, by extension, multiple births. The annual reports of the BFPA traditionally contain tables highlighting population figures for the past 30 years. This was up until the year 2015. And a glance at the 30-year figures will highlight trends which are as clear as daylight for those who want to see. And I have with me a copy of that, which shows that in 1980, there were 3,828 births. Teenage births were 1,093 and 28.6% of total births. By 2021, total births were 3,028. Teenage births were contributing to 447 and was 14.8% of total births. So we can see that for years we have had this gradual reduction in the birth rate over time. I must make the point, though, that there has been a considerable improvement in the quality of life of Barbadians at every conceivable level between the 1950s and now. The astronomical advancement in the upward mobility of women as a result of a revolution in their educational opportunities and access to reproductive health education and services tells me that having achieved the means which make possible the exercise of control over their fertility, the task at hand becomes that much more challenging. So we cannot underestimate the magnitude of the situation which confronts us today. It has been said that the average person is more likely to be influenced by what he or she believes to be in his or personal interest than what is in the society's best interest. I've seen that over the years. Assuming this to be the case, meaningful efforts must be made to help targeted individuals to see reversing this trend as a personal responsibility. Having said that, permit me to share some thoughts which I made public in the year 2017. As immodest as it may seem, please permit me to refer to an article on this very subject penned 7 years ago. and I mentioned, reversing the falling population growth rate is not insurmountable. However, it requires a level of knowledge, skill, and expertise which is readily available to any society which is genuinely serious about committing to successfully achieving this delicate objective. By its very nature, human reproduction is private, it is personal, and often compounded by religious, cultural, and socio-economic considerations. And I mentioned at the time that a workable population policy is indispensable and must be informed by a number of very important considerations, such as A, the carrying capacity of Barbados, given its size and peculiar socio-economic circumstances. The existing population density, we are still one of the most densely populated countries across the globe. C, coping capacity of existing social and other relevant services. Dr. Lorde mentioned that just now. We must look at the life expectancy rate in Barbados, which is still very good and perhaps the best across the Caribbean. We must look at an analysis of our population statistics over the last 60 years or so, and other such dimensions with relevance to the existing and projected quality of life of our people. The desired population as determined must be clearly stated and a strategic framework established with provisions for the continuous evaluation of and to ensure timely adjustments where required. In other words, we do not simply set goals. It cannot be overstated that political affiliation and religious persuasion must not be part of the criteria for selection to the suggested working group. In other words, whosoever will, all sectors of the population must be involved. I sincerely believe that couples, and women in particular, could be persuaded to embrace this national objective if they were presented with what I would describe as a comprehensive range of compelling incentives, which included some or all of the following 8-point prerequisites. I mentioned ready access to affordable, high-quality antenatal services, expanded, affordable, and accessible gynecological services in a more client-friendly atmosphere, upgraded and diversified birthing facilities, expanded maternity and paternity leave, more affordable and upgraded daycare and nursery school facilities with more flexible hours. There is a cry across the nation that people are put to the necessity of placing their jobs in danger in order to pick up children from school because there's nothing which makes possible for them to finish work at 4:30 or 5 and be certain that their children are going to be taken care of. So those are some of the prerequisites. More affordable and upgraded daycare and nursery school facilities with more flexible hours. Only today I heard of persons turning up at daycare centers and being told, I'm very sorry, but we are short of staff and you're going to have to carry back home your child. All of these are barriers to what this country needs at this time. And then guaranteed nursery school places at affordable costs, coupled with appropriate after-school supervision. Special, and this is really interesting, special and creative tax incentives for the first 2 children produced by mothers. And somebody say, are you going to pay women to have children? I am not saying so, but it is certainly, we are educated and skillful enough to bring about these creative changes. So this should go a long way towards motivating buy-in from professional women and women generally. Please tell me when I have only 3 minutes. No? 13 minutes. 13, I have good time. 7 minutes. Great. In the case of unemployed or underemployed women, critical material support would have to be agreed upon. Because you're unemployed does not mean that you should not provide for your children the best opportunities for them developing into the well-rounded citizens that we need. While I feel strongly that the 8-point plan I have just outlined can go a long way towards achieving the stated goal, those proposals are longitudinal and should therefore be accompanied by more immediate action, such as the already articulated managed migration policy. The persons to be considered for this initiative must meet a carefully constructed set of criteria, such as having a clean record, free of any breaches of the law. We don't want to bring into the country persons who are going to create problems for law enforcement. We need well-qualified persons academically and or skilled with appropriate accreditation. In other words, you can't turn up at immigration and say you're a carpenter or a mason or a plumber and you don't have anything to show for it. A sound health profile. In other words, if you're coming into Barbados to help us build the population, you must be up to the task. You can't bring in breaking down old people like myself. You have to bring people with the capacity. The person should be within the optimal reproductive age range, and by that I mean within the 18, perhaps the 35, 40 age group. Should be of good character, no pickpockets, drifters, or hangers-on. They should satisfy the CARICOM 6 months residency, and on successfully completion of that, be eligible for consideration for residency. In conclusion, let me, for the enlightenment of those persons who seek to associate women's right to exercise control over their fertility with low population growth, make the point that population dynamics cannot be divorced from the social, economic, and developmental policies and programs of any country. In addition, nothing should be said or done to imply that women are to be blamed or made out to be scapegoats if or when such issues excite public discussion. We must ensure that population policies are realistic. I hear quite a number of figures bandied about. We must ensure that the policies are realistic, reasonable, and of the utmost importance, does not inflict any injury to the fundamental rights and freedoms of our citizens, especially our women folk. In other words, a woman must not feel pressured into having children for the sake of having children. She, in her own deliberate judgment, must make that decision. Moral suasion must be the answer. And she must feel that having made that choice, there will be this enabling environment that will give her the confidence to make that important step. And the last point I want to make, and I will say just in case anyone thinks that I'm ignoring any elephant in the room, I make bold to say that population growth and abortion are not related. In fact, they are strangers, and long may this remain. I really thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to any discussion that will follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Griffith. Populate our parish, Barbados' population today and tomorrow. I'm going to invite Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh?
Thank you so much, Mr. Sherwood. And I would like to thank the St. Michael Cathedral, Dean Jeffrey Gibson, Mrs. Kathy Ann Wade Gibson for giving me this opportunity to speak to this audience this evening. And my topic of presentation is reproductive health and the place of artificial reproductive technologies, which we call ART very commonly. I would like to start, first of all, by wishing all men present over here a happy International Men's Day. And we really appreciate and acknowledge the positive contributions you have made to the society. So I'll be just introducing the topic of reproductive health, and I would speak about the role of reproductive health and its role on population growth, and move on to infertility and what are the common causes of infertility, and then we'll be discussing a little bit about artificial reproductive technologies. I will make my best attempt to make it more understandable and easy, lucid, right? So what is the connection of religion with population or reproductive health? We know that the problem of infertility or inability to conceive, it's not new. It has been from the historical times. And persons who have been suffering from this inability, that is infertility or inability to conceive, they were filled with much pain and anguish, and they looked for the sacred scriptures for solace, right? And if we look at Bible stories, we have the examples of couples who could not conceive or bear children. For example, Abraham and Sarah. Sarah conceived at a very extremely old age when it was impossible almost. Isaac and Rebekah faced infertility, and so did Hannah, who felt intense pain as she could not conceive. But with patience, God heard their prayers and they conceived, right? So it's a little bit of direction towards artificial reproductive techniques, how it can facilitate and help individuals who suffer with infertility. So what is reproductive health? So reproductive health is a state of complete physical and mental well-being with specific interest on the reproductive system of an individual. And it is also giving the person full independence to decide when to reproduce and how many times to reproduce, right? With respect to reproductive health, we follow 4 pillars of well-being, which includes autonomy, control, respect, and the support systems. When a person or patient comes to the doctor for treatment, autonomy plays a very important role in decision making for the individual. So the providers provide shared decision making, independence to the patient, in spite, even if the patient's feeling or decisions would counter with the physician's own decisions or what he would have learned through training, but still we give this opportunity to the patient to make their own decision, that is autonomy. And of course, respect, because we know that individuals would come from various cultures and backgrounds. In spite of these differences, we give them respect about what beliefs they have. And of course, having controlled through informed decision making. So we give the information, all the information is provided to the patient, but still after that the patient has the control of making their own decisions. So we give the opportunity to the patient to make their own informed decision. And this is done by a system of a support system. The system support is provided by education, that is health education, by the law system, and also through the health system. Right? So these 4 pillars are very, very important when a patient comes to the doctor for getting reproductive health services. So this gives the patient an independence to decide about their reproductive health, about their reproduction, without being judged by others or by the healthcare practitioner. So coming to what are the components of reproductive health? This includes 8 components, including safe motherhood, family planning, child health, prevention and management of abortion, gender-based violence, STIs and HIV/AIDS, which we know are directly related to infertility and having reproductive system infections, prevention and management of infertility, the topic of focus of my talk today, and the problems of elderly females. So these are the 8 components of reproductive health. So how does reproductive health affect the population? So there's an interface between population and reproductive health. if we look at through the lenses of demography, through healthcare indication, or through societal progress. So what is the role of demography in population, right? So demography includes the age group of the population density, and the size of population. So for example, if we have more number of aged populations, as we are aware, that is the topic of discussion today, that if we have more number of aged individuals in the population, that directly affects the birth rate of the population. So if you're going to have more individuals who are going to have infertility or who are going to have difficulty in conceiving, so automatically affecting the birth rate. So number of babies are going to be less, because they are not able to conceive easily because of their age limitation, right? So directly, reproductive health directly via the age has effect on the population size. So healthcare indicators, the birth rate is automatically going to reduce, and it also affects societal progress. So how is the societal progress affected? For example, if you're going to have more number of elderly individuals, it would affect the family dynamics. The family dynamics are going to change. You're going to need more caregivers at home to take care of the elderly persons, and the needs of elderly persons are specialized, and they would need more specialized healthcare facilities, which are going to be more expensive. So it's going to attract a cost towards it, right? So this definitely affects the societal progress, and of course when there are more number of elderly age group individuals, it's going to affect the tax paying process as well, right? According to United Nations, it was reported that 17% of Barbados population is expected to be 65 years and older by this year, that is 2024. So we can have that, hear that alarming bell. And of lately, we have been hearing reports from various media sources, newspapers. Barbados Today had reported in January 2024 saying that Barbados is heading towards being super-aged society. One of an international newspaper said that Barbados has an aging problem. Fears are about not enough contributions for tax base. And the newspapers also reported that the birth rate of Barbados, which was 2 children per woman from 2000, is reduced to 1.7 children per woman by 2020. So there's a reduction in birth rate, and life expectancy has increased. So persons live longer. So it was 74 years in year 2000, and now it has increased to 78 years. It was in 78 years in 2019. And the authorities feel that in 2020, 1 in 6 Barbadians would be 60 years or older. So 1 in every 6 individuals would be 60 years, so which is quite significant. So these are the demographies. And now coming on to the reproductive health challenges and how does it affect the population growth. As we mentioned that we had 8 components of the reproductive health. I'm going to just focus on some important components, which includes maternal mortality. What does it mean? So maternal mortality means that the number of maternal deaths within 6 weeks of giving birth. So how many mothers would, will not be able to survive after the delivery because of various health complications within 6 weeks. So that is an indicator of reproductive health challenge in a population. Unsafe abortions, as we know that some countries do not have not legalized abortions. So obviously, especially teenage, women, girls who would be pregnant would look for unsafe methods or illegal methods of abortion, which can lead to infections and thereby leading to infertility because of not proper health care facilities being taken by these young women, and leading to again to infertility. Then the third complication is STIs and HIV. We know that sexually transmitted infections and HIV can have a direct influence on the reproductive system, that is via infections, which can lead to infertility. It can also expose the individual for increased chances of developing cancers, and it can affect the pregnancy. The pregnancies can become complicated for mothers who have HIV, and this can also lead to HIV transmission in the newborn. And moreover, persons suffering from HIV who take treatment are more prone to develop drug resistance. And of course, these two conditions are directly associated with stigmatization in our community. So again, STIs and HIV are a major contributor to challenges of reproductive health. And as I mentioned, that these conditions can lead to infertility. So infertility is again a major contributor to population growth challenge. It is a major challenge in the growth of the population. So how can we address these challenges which I just mentioned? So these can be addressed by healthy reproductive or safe sexual practices, by improving access to reproductive health care services and infertility treatment. That's what we are going to discuss today, that is facilitating artificial reproductive technologies to the individuals who have difficulty, who face challenges conceiving, having the problem of infertility. So this can lead to increased fertility rates, and of course it can lead to increased population growth in the country. So what is the meaning of infertility, right? So there are two terms, one is infertility and the other term is subfertility. So when we mean, say, infertility, WHO has defined infertility as a disease, and this is defined by failure to achieve pregnancy by a couple who have cohabited for 12 months, who have been having regular sex without using any contraceptive precautions, right? So the individuals who are unable to conceive after 12 months of cohabiting, having regular sexual intercourse. Now the other term which I mentioned is subfertility. So subfertility is not a disease, and it is not a total inability to conceive. So this condition happens when the couples are trying to get pregnant, but the pregnancy is a challenge. It takes a little longer time. So individual takes a little longer time to conceive. So, so it's not an absolute inability for the individual to conceive. So that's subfertility. Coming on to the problem of infertility in our society, one of the research study which was done in Queen Elizabeth Hospital in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, that was an audit report in 2016 by Best et al. It mentioned that the prevalence of infertility in Barbadian population is 5.4%. That is the fifth most common problem seen in the gynecology outpatient department. So every fifth person who was presenting to the OPD department of gynecology was facing the problem of infertility. And majority had the infertility of duration of 1 year, right? So persons were trying to get pregnant for 1 year and they couldn't. And ovulation was seen as the most common individual causes, that is women who were not ovulating. We know that ovulation, production of ova or eggs is very important, right, in a woman to conceive. So ovulation was an important challenge in these women. And according to, so when these couples were interviewed, the report said that male evaluation was lacking, right? So we know that there is male infertility in our population, but it is associated with stigmatization. So as a result, males do not feel comfortable to go and present themselves. So definitely there is a need for more focused fertility care for the males in our population. Because every time we consider infertility, we just tend to think that the woman is put under several tests, and they think that the problem lies with the women, and even facilities and concession is offered more to women in comparison to men. So while considering infertility, it is very important for us to recognize that this condition in males is associated with stigmatization, and it needs public care facilities specifically for male, right? Moving on to the age standardized prevalence of fertility in the Caribbean, according to an NIH study which was done in 2023, the prevalence of fertility in the Caribbean is 15 per 100,000 people. So every 15 individuals per 100,000 people in the Caribbean would face the challenge of infertility. Now, infertility can be because of both female factors as well as male factor, which I just said that it's not only the female would have challenges conceiving. It could be because of problems in the female or the male. So it's 1/3 cause is by the female factor and 1/3 of the cause of infertility is by the male factor. And then again 1/3 is by both couple, that is the male together with the female, and then 10% approximately, the rest is due to unexplained infertility. So this is quite a challenging situation where everything is normal, right? Nothing is wrong with the female, she's been screened, nothing is wrong with the male, but in spite of that, still the couple cannot conceive. So that's known as idiopathic or unexplained infertility, which can be quite a challenge for the physician as well to treat, right? So these are basically factors. So in female, factors could be because of the blockage of the fallopian tubes, female reproductive system. Most commonly, as I mentioned before, the study stated that ovulation disorders, and we know one of the very common causes in our population which is rising is the PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, where young girls of reproductive age group are not ovulating, right? So the ovaries are not producing enough eggs. So that's a major challenge. Tubal blockage, the fallopian tubes are blocked or scarred, or there can be abnormalities of the uterus, right? Or there can be some problems in the lower part of the uterus, that is the cervix. Now the male factors, coming to, focusing on men. So it could be problems related to sperm. So this can be detected with the help of semen analysis, the male, that is the gold standard of detecting any problem in the ejaculate of the male, in the semen, right? Or it could be due to hormonal imbalances in the male. As we know that hormones, the testosterone or FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, or luteinizing hormone. So these, it's very important to get a hormonal checkup when the patient goes for screening for infertility to the physician to check whether the hormonal levels are normal in that individual. Like in female, again, obstructions can happen in the male reproductive tract also. It's just like a pipeline, right? So if there is a block in the pipeline, then the gametes, the sperms, or they do not pass through the reproductive tract, right? It can be because of genetic factors or because of lifestyle factors. Lifestyle factors especially we know very commonly because of obesity, right? Or any chronic diseases, or if the individual is exposed to any harsh chemicals or has been smoking for a long time. These are the factors which can affect the fertility status of an individual. Now in men, azoospermia can happen, that is complete absence of sperms in the ejaculate, or because of any increased number of abnormal percentage of sperms, or the sperms are not motile, right? So these are some of the complications which are seen in the ejaculate of the male. So these are individual male and female factors. Coming to the factors affecting conception, right? What can prevent conception? So inability to produce healthy sperms and production of healthy eggs, inability in the female, and blocked fallopian tubes in the female, that's where the fertilization takes place, right? So if there is a blockage there, or if there is inability of the sperm to fertilize the egg, for some reason fertilization doesn't occur, again that can be a challenge in conception. And even if the fertilization has occurred, it is very important for the embryo to implant within the uterus, right? So if there is no implantation in the uterus, again there can be a challenge for conception. So now we know that the couple has a challenge. So how could we assist this couple? This is with the help of artificial reproductive technologies. They go to the physician, we give them medications. In spite of medication, if they are unable to conceive, then we offer them artificial reproductive technology. So what is ART? ART is a group of high-tech treatment methods which we use to treat infertility. Some of the methods which are very commonly used is artificial insemination, which is also known as IUI or intrauterine insemination. We commonly know about IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, or ICSI, a more advanced form, which is known as intracytoplasmic sperm injection. So what are these techniques? So intrauterine insemination is the basic form, or artificial insemination is the basic form of treatment by ART. So by this method, what is done is the sperm is collected and it is placed inside the woman's reproductive tract with the help of a catheter. So the sperm is washed previously, right? There is a process by which all the impurities are removed, and then the washed sperm is introduced inside the reproductive tract of the female. And this is usually done in those cases where women have challenge in the lower part of the reproductive tract, that is the cervix, or there is ovulation problem. So, or if a woman is using donor sperm, sometimes the male can have infertility, so they use the donor sperm. So donor sperm can be used, or if the woman is having any allergies to the normal, the semen from the normal partner. So the semen could be treated and then introduced artificially in the reproductive tract of the female. That is known as intrauterine insemination or artificial insemination. It is done in Barbados, and it is the cheapest method of ART, and the approximate cost is Barbadian dollars, 800 to 1200 Barbadian dollars. But in individuals who have a blockage of the fallopian tubes, or who suffer from another condition which is known as endometriosis, or if the number of sperms is very, very low, in those individuals we do IVF. And so IVF is another method, and it is costing between 10,000 to 12,500. And the most advanced form is the ICSI, where you have even one sperm you can be taken with the help of one ovum. We fuse one sperm with the ovum. So in individuals who have very low sperm counts, even one sperm can be used, and it is done under high magnification. And so it is done under the microscope. The ovum is fused with the sperm. So this is done in individuals who have very low sperm count. That is known as intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where repeated IVF cycles fail. We take on to this technology. So these are the facilities which are commonly used in the Caribbean. And so I just wanted to inform you, and I also have a copy of my PowerPoint, which I will be sharing with the persons who are attending today's session, and also for further dissemination. So these were some of the methods of artificial reproductive techniques. As the name suggests, it is artificial. This is help in addition for individuals who are not able to conceive on their own, right? So thank you for the opportunity. Any questions, I would like to welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Professor Lorde, and thank you, Mr. Griffith. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now your opportunity to engage the panelists. And as you do so, I understand that there's oftentimes the tendency for you to put your question within a long theoretical framework. So I will ask you to resist the temptation of doing that. And please stand, of course, and pose your question to the panelists. There is a microphone just next to the cross aisle, so you can step out and proceed to the microphone and pose your question. While you do that, I will get the ball rolling. Professor Lorde, the severity of the population deficit was highlighted in Barbados recently during the NIS debate in Parliament. And I think it was at that point in time that we recognized that we needed some more bodies on this island. In your presentation, towards the end of your presentation, you spoke of the multidimensional approach or solutions. I want to give you an opportunity to expand on that some more, and perhaps to tell us about this multidimensional approach or solutions.
Okay. All right. So, as I said, the Populate or parish, it's fine. It's good now?
No, I think the technical guy will assist you.
Hello?
Yes, there
Oh,
you
no.
go.
Okay, good. Thanks for that question. So, as I said, the way it's posed is populate or perish. It's a binary. It's one or the other, but it's not so simple. And in the first instance, well, yes, you do need a certain population size if you want to be able to continue for that society to be maintained. Yes, but a number of things arise. And so, okay, it oversimplifies the complexity of development. As I said, there are some countries which are not large, but which are still thriving both economically and socially. And I mentioned Singapore, and I mentioned Switzerland. The thing though is this, is that when you only focus on population growth in response, it's going to ignore, or let's just say, reduce other possibilities like technology, innovation as a response to the fact that you're having some population growth rate challenges. Another thing is when you say populate, there's a gender implication there, because when we speak about, well, increasing the birth rate, which is, yes, a partial response, what you're doing is you're reinforcing, let's say, certain gender roles or stereotypes. Tell the women to have more children. And as Mr. Griffith said, he did mention it, along with what we saw with this. Yes, it happened along the way we had a declining population, but at the same time, what it meant is that women entered or participated in the labor force in much greater rates. They became more educated. They became, their incomes grew. They're able to participate a lot more fully into the economic life and activity of a country. So that's what I said, reducing, just saying populate or perish is not sufficient. It's not that you just increase the population, because one of the things that we always fear, one of the main things that we in terms of that discussion with the NAS, is about being able to provide pensions and other emoluments to those that are already retired. So here in the first instance, if you think about the way in which our NIS is structured, we have is tiered. So those in the highest earning income brackets, they pay the highest rates, and those, it's tiered down to some minimum rate. I can't say the number. I don't know the number off the top of my head at the moment. So in the first instance, one could say, well, yeah, it would be great if, let's just say, the types of jobs that persons had were much higher earning jobs, in which case the contribution rates of more persons would be at the upper rates, in which case then the issue of needing more persons just to provide for the pensions of one individual elderly person, then that helps to mitigate that in the first instance. So let's just say better paying jobs that generate greater income, so that we wouldn't have to change the contribution rates because more persons would be contributing at the higher rates. I mentioned innovation and I mentioned technology. Now these are things we're not, for various reasons. It's not that we're not innovative, but certainly in terms of being at the frontier of where technology and innovation is, we're not there. So in relation then to the fact that we are a shrinking population, as I said, one thing we have to do is to basically still be able to tap into the productivity of those that are retired. And I don't mean that they have to work, but they do have a wealth of knowledge, right? And so when we speak about education, a lot of educated persons that are, but I don't want to say down at home to make it seem that they're really doing nothing. My point is, we do have to tap into that. We do have to bring that into, we have to be able to tap into that in ways that is able to add to the economic activity and vitality of society. Mr. Griffith did mention it, and I mentioned it too. So as I said, there are challenges when it comes to the suggestions that we've been here. We'll have more children, but that's a long-term solution, and it is important. The rates that I heard are startling, yes. It was just over 2, only 24 years ago, it's 1.7 now. That is not a small drop. That is a very significant drop. 1.7 per couple is a society that is definitely in decline. it's shrinking and aging. This is a problem. So if I speak now about, I guess to circle back to your question, Sherwood, I have a few notes here. Apologies to the audience here and online. And I mentioned some of the things that may seem currently alien to us, but already exist in terms of these technologies. So I'll mention some of them here. I have so many notes. Right. I can't seem to find a particular note. Nonetheless, others are finding ways to enhance it. So I mentioned jobs, but I also mentioned, like, I would say, well, an economist would say certain things like productivity, right? Because one thing that is always going to be important in any of this is our productivity rates. Now, we do have some challenges with productivity rates in Barbados. And I don't mean productivity in terms of bearing children. I mean actually productivity in terms of what we produce per person per hour. That's the definition. And so along with an increase in productivity rates, you're also going to find similarly then that things that we currently have concerns about in terms of our fiscal ability to do it, those will also be improved. The issue of inward migration, yes. It's going to be part of the solution, Sherwood. We can't escape it. We always have concerns about persons, say, coming and competing for jobs that Barbadians may very well think should go to Barbadians. So it will have to be well managed. It's not just a free-for-all. We do know, for example, there are many instances where we see ads in the paper and it says you can't find this person, so we have to advertise. You know the sort of angst that, causes Barbadians, certainly. So I do say, yeah, it's not something that I have the exact answer to, but when I say it's multifaceted, meaning, yes, we do need to improve our growth rates. It's not a simple case of just ask them to have more children, or even just a case of giving them some monetary incentive to have more children. But, it's a recognition, though, that we have to be innovative about how we get that to happen. There will have to be some sort of very managed inward migration. Others have done it, and we have to look at what sort of things they did. They had programs to help persons assimilate. They had ways in which to have them become part of their communities, because it is natural. People are tribal, so even if persons came to Barbados, what might very well happen is that they will kind of stick together. They don't become a part of the community. They kind of just stay in a particular either community where they live close to one another, or they work in areas that are close. So you have to put a lot of those programs in place to help that to happen. I mean, that is kind of an instinctive thing. So Sherwood,
Yes,
I will say this. I didn't have an answer, and I gave a very discursive response to what you said. But it's just really just to reinforce the fact that it's a very, very difficult problem to solve. But we have to put our heads together, because aging and shrinking that's really it. It's not just small popular parish. The real issue is that we are an aging and shrinking population. That is really the twin challenge that we have to address.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Lorde. Is there a question from the audience yet? You want to? Yes, ma'am. Could you approach the microphone? I recognize you.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Esme Knights. I'm a member of the Cathedral Church. I have 3 short questions, one for each of the presenters. First, I want to say thank you so much for your contributions. So the first question is for Professor Lorde. You mentioned Singapore and Switzerland as 2 countries that managed to thrive with small populations. And my question is, in our context, have we looked at these countries, at their models, to see if there are any lessons that can be learnt that we can apply to ourselves in Barbados? That's for Dr. Lorde. For Mr. Griffith.
Would you allow, I'm going to allow him to speak it first, Dr. Lorde?
Sorry, I thought you were an asshole. Okay, so I will say this, I would hope that we are looking across the world for ways in which countries with this similar problem, they're addressing it. It's not a new problem. Japan has it. It's an issue in a country like Canada. Canada is also, because it's so large, they try to get persons to migrate to certain parts of Canada. Japan has gone the road of technology. Japan is very, if you've ever been to Japan, it feels, for Barbadians, it will feel like going into literally another world when you go to Japan. It's very, 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 very different society. We see these sorts of ways in which these countries are addressing these things. So, but I'll speak a bit about the ways in which these countries are organized is very different. So Switzerland, it's a very, I mean, in some ways, it's a very homogenized society, right? And what that country, Switzerland, it's part of what we would call the Scandinavian region. These are very, the state provides a lot. Persons pay very high taxes, but then in return, there are a lot of goods and services that the state provides. And they're very when they say far-reaching in their thinking, I mean, they think of these things a long time before it really becomes a problem. And so what they've managed to do, as far as handle their aging population problem, is a lot of specialization in terms of their economy. So persons do very specialized things. And so there's a lot of assistive technologies in terms of dealing with the aged. And Barbados is going to have to go that road. We have, in this respect, let's say we've thought about it in terms of how we address the problem for persons that are disabled. So, things that we have ramps and so on and so forth. That's part of the thing. But, as we become increasingly elderly, 1 in 6, that's about almost 17% of the population in it's right now. Yeah. We're going to have to think a lot about the mobility challenges for the population. So in terms of our transportation systems, the way the buses are designed now is not going to work for a population where 70% of the population is going to be over 65. But they've thought of that. For us, it's not that we haven't thought of it, is that we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it. The context for us is really, I would say, how do we move, let's just say, in terms of the types of jobs that exist now, to jobs that, let's say, a lot more, not, let's say high paying, is that type of job or type of activity is one that we're going to commensurate sort of pay that will allow us to do the things that we need to do in a fiscal way at the level of the country. So I'll give you an example to just show you where we could go. Right now, a lot of what we are doing internationally is focused on climate change or changing the global financial architecture. For Barbados as well, we would have to also think of these issues. These things are not divorced from our aging and shrinking population. So when we talk about the global financial architecture, we're talking about creating fiscal space in order for us to be able to do things nationally to help Barbadians. The climate change is related to aging. I mentioned these sort of things. Aging populations are increasingly vulnerable to climate change, increasingly vulnerable to extreme events. So this is not something that is to come, it is here, right? Countries like Switzerland, countries like Singapore, why they're able to do that we can't do is they're much wealthier. And they can actually invest resources to confront these sort of challenges that Barbados are going to have. What we will have in Barbados, I would dare say, is that we just have to have, we have to be innovative. And I don't necessarily mean like create something new, but innovative in terms of the way in which we confront the problem, because, the things that those countries can do. Singapore is very wealthy. Singapore is very wealthy. These countries are always in the top 10 on the Human Development Index across all 3 categories. So their ability to do things dwarfs our ability to do things. Maybe perhaps what we have to consider is that there are things that we may have to trade off. It's a sad thing to say. When I say trade off, there's some things that we may have to give up in order to get something else. Opportunity cost is what it is. But again, I gave you a discursive response. because you've asked me a very difficult question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your response. Am I allowed to ask more?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so my next question is to Mr. Griffith, and I'll just briefly preface it by what Professor Lorde had said in answering Mr. McCaskie's question when he talked about enhancing the participation and vitality of the elderly population. So, in some countries, there is the concept of the creche, where women can have a facility on site at their workplace, and they can go, and attend to their infants. Has that ever been considered as a viable option in the Barbadian context?
Could you pass me the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it has been considered for more than 30 years, especially when the harbor was considered to be very industrialized, when we had thousands of women going to these assembly plants and smoking and all of that years ago. The problem was always the cost. And there are some companies who would support it verbally. And we even had an officer, Elrene Seeley, who was associated with the Barbados Workers' Union, who was trying to get the businesses in the harbor industrial plant to come together. In other words, every business need not have one, but they could come together and do it. But the issue was who was going to foot the bill. And let me make this observation, and this is not to criticize any Barbadians, but it has dawned on me that we really want first world services on a third world economy. And I think that is a question that we would have to give consideration to. Barbadians no longer compare themselves with St. Vincent and St. Lucia and Dominica. We compare ourselves with the United States and Canada and England and the more developed countries. That is a problem, I think, that we must confront. And I do not know how it would ever end. But if you listen to the call-in programs every day, Barbadians want any and every service, irrespective of the cost. And I do not know at what point someone will say, it is all good and well, and we would love to see it, but we just cannot afford it.
Thank you very much. And finally,
Dr. Singh.
yes, Dr. Singh. I am wondering if you mentioned certain diseases that contribute to infertility and subfertility, and I am wondering if there's ever been any research in the Barbadian context of how diet has affected the high incidence of fibrocystic disease and non-producing ovaries in young women of childbearing age. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Lifestyle and diet play a very important role in this particular illness. And as with regards to your question on research, there has been research on diet, but I am not aware of any research, particularly diet related to the anovulatory cycles, that is the polycystic ovary disease. I'm not, I don't have idea about that. But with regards to lifestyle factors, I could say that they play a very important role, especially obesity, right? We know that we have a problem of obesity in our society, especially those individuals who suffer from non-communicable diseases like diabetes. Those individuals have obesity as well. So that can again be related to infertility. So those individuals who are obese, it is seen, especially male individuals, because I can speak about my area of specialization, that is male infertility. We've seen that those individuals who are obese also have challenges of infertility. So lifestyle plays an important role, and as well as diet. So it's very important to have a healthy diet. Exposure to fast foods which have added chemicals or additives, preservatives in that. Research, not here locally, but abroad, research has proven that that is the main culprit which is responsible for polycystic ovary disease in young girls, adolescent girls. And that again can cause, in males, in case of male infertility, that can cause endocrine disruption. So the pesticides which we use for agriculture, we see that we have a good produce, but we don't realize that the vegetables and fruits which we are consuming because of the use of pesticides, can alter the hormonal status. So that's why they are known as endocrine disrupting agents, which can further lead to infertility in patients. So it is best to have foods in natural form, have more fruits and vegetables rather than having meat or a very high fat diets. So,
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your 3 questions, and thanks for the 3 responses. Is there another question from the audience? Yes, ma'am, go right ahead. I acknowledge you.
Good evening, all. I'm Sherwood, one of the trustees of St. Michael's Center. My question, it's a general question, and I guess people might come on it from different angles. My concern is, what is the role of, the church and community groups, but the church particularly in this context, in terms of supporting population growth, in the sense of supporting the family patterns and the support network that would be needed to both encourage people to have more children, but also to support them to have them more comfortably. So I would be interested to hear Mr. Griffith's perspective from the diocesan level, but also interested, there's some dimensions to that even from some of what Dr. Singh said in terms of the different patterns of families we might have. We have women doing more, some women having children later in life and their particular dynamics in terms of supporting that and the social stuff around that, some of the social stigma even around the fertility issues. There's role of that, and then there's still, I still mourning the loss of the child allowance on my income tax. And in a context of a changing, of a shrinking and aging population, be interested to hear Professor Lorde's take on the fiscal mechanisms and incentives and that sort of thing, because they seem woefully and strikingly absent. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, ma'am. Who would like to take that first? Would you like to go? Yeah, great. Dr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith will go first.
Thank you for that question again. In fact, the Family Life Commission has been involved in parenting, training in parenting. But of course, we were in full stride when COVID came, and that knocked us off course, and we have not fully got back on track as yet. But the Family Life Commission is committed to working in all 47 or so Anglican churches to ensure that there is at least one committee in each church which will be working with families, because as you know, family is where the action is, so to speak. But just let me say in passing though that history is important. I know I see a historian with his ears quite pricked at the moment. But there was a time in the church when it was frowned upon if a young woman became pregnant at too early an age. Now, it takes many years. I spoke about attitude change earlier. It takes time. My mother died at 93, and even at 93, she recalled when she became pregnant. Her mother was in the Mothers' Union, and her mother had to give up her position in the Mothers' Union because she became pregnant. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not casting judgment, but today, we would love to see more young people become pregnant. The issue is, though, that the entire society has changed, and people will tell you that they have to enjoy life before. Now, there's almost 450 women who were in a program that I am responsible for, and I almost said the wrong thing. And I would say to them when they come to see me, and they say, well, I have a son or daughter, I would say, well, you have to go again, it cannot be one. And they would always speak about the economic situation. They always talk about the care. Who is going to mind this child when I am at work? And the fact that the family dynamics have changed so radically that there are no grandparents at home and old aunts and great uncles anymore. They're all out working. And those who are not doing that are done with dementia. So the point is that the shape of the family has changed. And therefore we have a lot of work to do. It may seem pretty simple and straightforward that we need 80,000 people in this population. It is not that easy. And I tell you, like I said before, educated women, enlightened women are not going to spend, and I'm quoting Clyde Gollop now, are not going to spend their most productive years in childbearing. Women want to be educated, establish themselves in business, and like they used to say, occupy spaces in the commanding heights of the economy. And those women are not going to spend their most productive years having children, as contradictory as that might seem. So we have really and truly, Dr. Lorde said it, we have to talk our people through this, help them to understand where this country is, but put the infrastructure in place that they would feel that once they have that additional child or two, that there will be support. Because history has shown them that if you have too many children, poverty might be staring you in the face, because it is not as easy as it may seem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Griffith.
Okay, thank you for that question. I would like to mention that church plays a very integral role in terms of encouraging individuals to pay attention to their own health. I know we are living a very busy and stressful life. So when individuals reach out here to the church, there's some time for yourself. So they can be encouraged to pay attention to your own body, what your body is speaking, and to adhere to healthy lifestyles. For example, exercise, have a good diet, have more fruits and vegetables, avoid smoking, maintain a good weight. So these are some, common community outreach or health talks can be organized through the church, where persons can pay more importance to this, and automatically, especially the younger individuals in fertile age group, because now as we see the research, what happens, research is showing that lifestyle and diet plays a more important role in hindering fertility or causing infertility. So obviously these are basic things which appear very easy to be said, but as we see in our day-to-day life, individuals are having more fast food. We would see persons, just to save time, they would just go to Sherwood. You just ask an individual how many times you eat from Sherwood in a month. Very few people have fresh cooked food at home. So that would be again saving money, as well as, it will be more healthy. And I would also recommend, through the church, where we have a lot of community outreach events in the church where persons get screened for their health conditions. So obviously having a regular health checkup, going and getting connected with your healthcare practitioner, getting those routine screens, timely is very, very important again. Thank you.
Yes. Well, one thing I've noticed certainly this evening is that you do not get any softball questions, huh? These are all very difficult. So, Sharianne, right, so I do have a few points I can speak about here, and I like what Mr. Griffith said. So I'll start there and then run through a few of my points here. And infrastructure is important, and you said in terms of how we have to reorganize the way in which our economy is structured. So if we want to encourage persons to have more children, then the infrastructures have to be in place. So right now, he did mention, for example, school, more or less goes between, some start as early as 8, if you're talking private schools, but they finish sometime between 2 and 3. But persons, male and female, they're working at those times. You have to leave work to go pick up your children. You may have to go back to work, or you may have to take them with you if you don't have the support to drop them off and go back to work. So, right now I'm doing some give back at Harrison College, and some of the children tell me, they get home at 11. Why? Because when school is finished, their parents are still working, and they have to go to their mother's or father's workplace, and then when they finally get home, it's 11. I don't know how that could happen. How do you manage to get home at 11? So things like the child care facilities, that has to change. We will have to have facilities that go 24 hours. Because a lot of persons work shift times, so they literally go to work in evenings, but they don't have the supports to help their children, to manage their children. But you also need services that help to do things like provide teaching assistance. We call it lessons, but let's just say everyone can't afford that. So this is not where the church can come in. And so I mentioned a few things. So here I speak in general about, let's talk about the financial incentives. Yes, it would be, it's not a large incentive, but at least it's something. And for persons that it would benefit from, give them that tax credit for, a child, that would be a start. It's a cost, but these are things that incentivize persons. Subsidized child care and parental leave, these things matter. If persons are going to have children, then they have to be paid maternity leave. And the leave might actually have to be longer instead of what it is now. In Germany, for example, you have maternity leave for something like close to 2 years. You know what I mean? And so things like this would encourage persons to have children because those early years are the most important. The church, community support for families. One of the significant costs, of course, is going to be housing, right? And when they say housing, affordable housing, but also the space to raise more children, right? So it's not just have them, you have to have space to raise them. So the church, and I'm not saying the church is to donate housing, but I'm just saying it's to work with government to identify ways in which affordable housing can be provided, right? Now, of course, one of the things that the church does, of course, is mentoring. So they have children, but it's not just having children, it's raising those children. And so the church, of course, has a big role to play there because those children have to be mentored. There are certain norms and values that we grew up with that we still want to inculcate, and the church is going to have a big role in that particular dimension. There's some things that are challenged. Part of the reasons why we're shrinking too is not just that their birth rate is low, they have a brain drain problem, and that's because there's insufficient opportunities for persons here in the country. Persons, yes, they're educated by the state, primary, secondary, tertiary education, and then they can't find meaningful job opportunities. They leave. They don't come back. There might be some remittances, but they say there's nothing for them here. They will get opportunities that we can't find the equivalent of here. So it's not just that women are having less children, it's also that the children that are here are leaving. So our net migration is negative. We have more persons leaving than we have them coming in. So there would have to be some way for us, I don't know precisely the way in which the church could engage, we have to find ways for these opportunities to be created. As I said, it's going to be a real collaborative effort. Economic empowerment is always important. You can advocate for family-centered work policies, as I just mentioned. extended maternity and paternity leave. Fathers are important too. It is International Men's Day. We don't currently have paternity leave. Men have an important role to play. I would mention something the church can do as well in the church, because of the church is a community, and the church has to play a part in terms of collecting information that the state might otherwise not be able to collect. The church has an opportunity to reach out. It's a part of communities. It can get into those communities and speak to the sort of things that others may not be able to do in a way that seems intrusive, because the sort of way in which the church is going to be looked at and viewed is going to be a way in which, say, if I go into a community, they think I'm just coming to collect data, I just want to write a paper or something. The church isn't going to be identified like that. The church is going to have a much more pastoral view in the way in which the church is going to be recognized. So I would say leverage the sort of strengths that churches have. It's going to be advocacy, it's going to be mentoring, it's going to be teaching. The church has to be able to identify persons within its own congregation that these are some of the challenges, as difficult as they are to have, which is whether it's a medical issue. Maybe they may feel more comfortable speaking to their pastor or their reverend. Is it a financial issue? This can be identified. Women, as I said, I don't want it to sound, and then that's why I want to hasten to say this. I'm a social scientist, so I know I have to always be cognizant of these types of things. It's not to say women have more children. I don't want to put pressure on them to have more children just because we have a shrinking society. That's too simple a solution, is my point. We know it has to grow, but we also have to think about it on the other side. What are the sort of other innovative ways in which we can, stop the decline, the brain drain? We have to try to find a way to increase the economic opportunities of persons here. That requires entrepreneurship. That requires young people to have the opportunities to be able to tap into the huge financial resources that exist in Barbados in order to start businesses, in order to basically give persons that say, well, where's the money? How am I going to support a child? Well, if the opportunities are here for wealth enhancement, growing incomes, the ability to have affordable housing, the ability to have the infrastructure so that when I work, I'm comfortable that my child is at school, there are good child care facilities. My child needs help in terms of understanding this material at school. I can't afford lessons, but the state has infrastructure to provide those lessons. These are things that matter. So when it comes time when people say that it's rich people's children that go to certain schools, this is not the case. You know what I mean? We have a lot of bright people, but need a hand up. It's not less welfare. They just need those small little things. I can tell you, and here, Sherwood, just to show you what I mean. So sometimes we find that things like proper nutrition, Dr. Singh has mentioned it, that can matter in terms of, that's why my mother was a teacher for 40 years. She used to say, yeah, she could see they would look real thick and healthy during the school term because they're getting school meals every day. But then during the vacation, they don't have those meals. They don't have these are things that we have to provide, right? So when I say the care, it has to be all year long. If you want women, males, so couples, it's not just women having children by themselves. If you want to do this, this is the sort of public health and public interventions that will have to take place when we say, yes, we have, but the church, the state, we're saying it, but to me, every time I hear it said, Sherwood, it almost always seems like it's all about the fact that we need to, it almost is the NAS issue.
Yes.
It doesn't seem goes beyond saying, well, we don't have enough people of working age to provide for the pensions of those that are retired. The issue is one-dimensional if you want to look at it like that, and that is a problem. So, I said, I read the blogs, I read the newspapers, I see the comments.
Yeah.
They want us to have more children. Who's going to help me take care of this child? Who's going to help me feed this child? The state is best able. The church has a moral voice, a moral authority to help and become part of those conversations. Us at university, whether it's social scientists, whether it's medical scientists, whether it's our natural scientists, whether it's the legal fraternity, we all have to be part of the conversation. But I'll end here.
Yes.
Populate or perish. I'll stress. It is not a binary thing. It's not just have a, yes, we know it's declining, but it's not just a case of just say, have more children. That's part of the solution. It's not just a case of inward migration. You have to really carefully think of what you would want that to look like. Thanks, Sherwood.
Well, thank you very much. Migration is probably another discussion for another time, because I'm interested in hearing your views on migration and how that can be managed. We're into the last 10 minutes of the discussion. Senator the Reverend Charles Morris, I recognized you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Let me, first of all, congratulate let me see if I get it right. I was getting it wrong all the time. The St. Michael Center for Faith and Action for sponsoring an event such as this. I think it is important for our society to discuss these issues. And if at this point we have been here, then we recognize that the church itself is making some contribution to correcting an historical past which itself was complicit. Now, I wasn't going to speak, but since you referred to the historian, I suspect that you meant me, so I will refer to it. And I have three concerns which will eventually come out in three questions for each of the panelists. And Ms. Lorde, sorry, should I call you Professor? Dr. Lorde, I want to look, first of all, at the whole historical process. I don't think that this issue just started. This issue was recognized as far back as 1798, when Robert Malthus came with his theory on population. And that time he was saying that the population was increasing exponentially. That was Europe, of course. It was increasing exponentially. And we took that approach here. Because if we go back a little, I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you with my history, but I can't help it. But if we go back in history, you'll recognize that even if we take the most conservative view of the forced migration that came to these shores, I'm talking about the slave trade. Some people said it's 10 million. Some people said it go as low as 2. But even if it was 10 or 2, the population today in the Caribbean is not even 7 million. It's about 6 something. Which means that the population failed to reproduce itself. It failed to reproduce itself. And if you compare the United States with the same thing, that the southern states are not as populated as the northern states. So we see what the common trend there was. Now, so the question is, has our population really been growing, or has it been performing the same way over a period of time? That is the historical process. How did it contribute towards the situation we face today? Should I ask all three questions, or?
No, one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One at a time.
I think that might be, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. Okay, so you've taken us back. Now, the thing about population, I will say this, and it's some ways the way in which a lot of the research economics views population is that it actually acts as a brake on economic growth. Countries that are too populated, yeah? And because for a population to be productive, we will say, just using very simple economic concepts, they need capital, there needs to be entrepreneurship, and so on and so forth. So a population that is too large, you reduce the amount of capital per worker in order for that worker to be productive. So yes, there is a level of population, and Mr. Griffith mentioned it, he spoke about the carrying capacity. Yes, the population can be too large in terms of it can act as a brake on growth. The converse is true. The population can be too small, in which case, as you said, we are not reproducing ourselves. Barbados is a very strange type of country. Even as we're saying the population is declining and aging, as Griffith is right, it's also one of the densest populations in the world in terms of the number of persons per square mile. It is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. However, we're faced with an issue where I wouldn't say our inability to reproduce, because what we find is along with, and we have not necessarily in a deliberate way, but because countries that are becoming wealthier, what tends to happen is, yes, as I said, women participate in greater percentages in the labor force. Along with that higher participation rate, we do things like we defer the age at which they may have the first child. And that, once they defer that, then the likelihood, the probability of having a second child declines the later the first child arrives. And so in some ways what we have become, the Caribbean I mean, is in some ways we have a victim of our own success. Because the things that we're trying to achieve, yes, is to lift our persons out of poverty, but whether implicitly or explicitly, persons also associate that with basically the number of children that they're prepared to have. It's not an unplanned thing, the number of children people have. They say, well, I'm going to get my education to whatever level, qualifications, credentials, and so forth. I defer having a child. They may have their children in their 30s, but then they decide, well, I'm going to make sure that I provide for this child the best way in which I can. This child is going to have everything I didn't have. That's the sort of mentality. I'm telling you, I'm thinking this. I mean, I have more than one, I have more than two, I actually have three. But my point is that when I was young, I wasn't thinking to have three, not at that time. But I'm just saying, the way in which, and I teach at university, it's my 21st year, women, they're not planning for children at early ages. We've been a victim of the things that we want. We want to be a more educated society. We want to do things like, enjoy those sort of assets that we associate with prosperity. At the same time, it's a deliberate choice, Sherwood. They have fewer children. Yeah. But they say, you know what? I'm going to have fewer children, but this one child I have, they're going to have everything. Yeah. That's what they say to do. You mentioned the Malthus, but they said, yeah, he was concerned that we would grow too large. And from the perspective of the globe now, we have too many people. In terms of its pressure on the resources that are there. That's really what I'm saying. So it's not, I'm just saying get rid of people. My point is that the population of the earth is still growing, and we put an increasing pressure on the earth's natural systems. That's why we have these concerns about climate change. That's why we have concerns about how much GHG emissions we put in the atmosphere. What the Prime Minister is doing is great. It is tied indirectly to the things we're talking about here. But we've been a victim of our own sex. We want to become wealthier, but it's inversely related, I will tell you, to population. Wealthier countries tend to be countries that the population growth rates are the lowest. Barbados, I don't necessarily say that we are becoming a wealthy country, but certainly when we look at the correlation between wealth and population growth rates, that is where Barbados is. That's the sort of trend, not intentionally done, but looking at the data, that's what we observe. Wealthier countries tend to have the lowest growth rates. That's why we say countries that are poor tend to be countries that also have very high population growth rates. For reasons that are, it's not a causative thing I'm saying, it's just a correlative thing that I'm referring to.
Thank you. My second concern now goes to Mr. Griffith, because I take the opposite view on the whole issue of the church. Because in my view, the church is to be actions of the church that retarded population growth. And I think these are issues that we have to face frankly. Because look at the history of the church and you will see that it followed this conservative path where the church introduced systems to prevent growth. For example, look at the issue of pushing monogamous marriage. They still do it. They did not recognize, what do you call them, the common law unions. These things were not recognized. As a matter of fact, I can talk about Barbados because we followed what the British government did when they sent George Singh down here, because every time there was a social problem, they blamed the family. And George Singh blamed the family for the 1937 riots. It was the dysfunctional family and the breakdown of the family that caused these riots. And what did they do? They sent George Singh and he said to his family, and what did they do? They started to encourage people to get married. In Jamaica, they had mass marriages, and they never solved the problem. In Barbados, we started the Mothers' Union to tell but you know what? The Mothers' Union was started not by poor black people. And I'm not talking race here, but it was started by some white female priests, wives of priests, and who included other people and excluding a certain set of the population. And then, when certain women realized that they were not included, they formed the Women's Auxiliary, I think it is. And then when others realized that they were excluded, they formed the Women's Fellowship. And all I'm saying is that, look at the policies of the church. Don't get children, don't get children. When the population was decreasing and people did not see it. Because children, women were getting fewer children. And don't talk about teenage pregnancies. Now, I think that was really mishandled. I don't know if you agree with me, but the church assisted in mishandling it. Because a child gets pregnant at 15, she was kicked out of school, but the man who did it continued in school. And it created a certain stigma. And then the whole thing about the family should be nuclear. All of these things cause our population to decline. Now, don't you think, Mr. Griffith, that the time has come for the church itself to revisit that kind of teaching? For example, while there is a legal marriage, don't you think that religious marriages should be included? I mean, there are certain religions that, for example, in Barbados, the legal marriage is recognized. But there were also religious marriages. So a man can have more than one wife. And these are things we have to look at, frankly. In other cultures, it's happening. So we have to look at this whole concept of marriage. And I think that marriage really should remain the institution of the state and not controlled by the church. Because if we continue with this, our population will continue to decrease. What do you think, sir?
All yours.
Two marriages going to be religious and legal.
You have me lost a little bit.
Pardon?
Could you restate the question in fewer words, please?
I know you want to. I am saying, sir, I'm asking you, don't you think the policy of our country now, in terms of we can have a religious marriage and a legal marriage? In other words, I can get married to a wife legally, but that should not prevent me from having other wives religiously.
As you said that, I remember Professor Errol Miller. Errol Miller wrote several books. I considered him a friend. I brought him to Barbados on more than one occasion to speak at workshops. And I think he wrote The Marginalization of the Caribbean Male was one. But I knew him in another capacity. He was a local preacher in Jamaica as well. And once he was giving some family planning enthusiasts a joke. Well, it wasn't too much, it was a sociological point he was making. That you had two sets of families. And sometimes one man was at the center of both families. He was talking about in Jamaica, where the well-to-do live in Beverly Hills and all of those other opulent places. And he had a wife and two children. But occasionally, or maybe frequently, he would find himself in working class areas, the depressed areas, where he had another family. And the relationship with the woman or women he had was a demonstration of what a relationship in a marriage ought to be. So he would have 6 children in the working class areas, and he would visit them every now and then. He would support them, of course. But in his own household, he would have a wife and 2 children. So that was the joke he gave, but we took it very seriously because we have a history in Barbados of a similar thing, except that the children born to the woman to whom he was married were seen as proper, but those born to other women were, in those days we never saw it as discrimination. Those were the days when married women, the children of married couples, those were baptized on a Sunday afternoon. And the children born to unmarried parents, they were christened on a Wednesday morning. I saw that in my district. And people grew up, even within the school system, you were seen differently. It was only recently that Henry Ford piloted that change in legislation. So I'm saying, though, that really we have now to encourage responsible relationships, and contrary to what happened in the past, even in the school system, we have to demonstrate a little more sympathy for those women, those girls who become pregnant earlier than we would like them to become pregnant. Listen, I served at family planning for many years, okay? And whenever there was a complex issue, the persons were sent down to my office. And I remember a young woman came into my office, and in fact, 2 stories. One was a law student at the university. And because she was a female and she was youngish, and she went up to the clinic and said, I want, and the A word, I want to terminate this pregnancy. And they said, no, but you would have to go through counseling and all those things first. She said, I'm not doing that. And they sent her down to my office. She said, you can talk who you like. I am not having this child because I must have my law degree. I went through the paces and shared a cup of tea with her, and she went her merry way. But there was another occasion when a lady came in with a 17-year-old. This lady was the wife of a pastor. I can make this real quick. The 2 families were very close, and the couples were going off on a religious convention, and the children knew each other. But while they were out on the convention, the daughter of one pastor became impregnated with the son of another pastor. And the lady brought that young lady in to see me. And I realized this young woman is not interested in terminating any pregnancy. But the mother was saying, you can break up the church, you can cause this problem. And I spent some time chatting, put her out of the room, spoke with the lady, spoke with the child, and then bring them back together. And they were adamant. I didn't see them for quite a while. And I thought that she had taken this child somewhere and forced her, until the lady came many months after, say, I owe you an apology. I really thought that when I brought her to family planning, y'all would convince her that she should have that termination. I said, no, we don't do it that way. If the young woman is aware of the consequences and the responsibility, and she said, yes, I want to maintain this pregnancy, we always give the young women support. So I'm saying that in this society, there was a time when parents felt that a pregnancy in a family could devastate the family. But with the correct, and this is where the church comes in, but with the correct support services, the counseling, and the absence of any judgmental attitude made the world of difference. So the point is, these stories got around, and young people got to realize, well, it is not so good out there if you get pregnant. And therefore, young couples who really wanted to get pregnant, when they were faced with the social stigma attached to it. And then lastly, let me say that while we're talking about population, do you know that we place a lot of emphasis on safe first sexual practices as a result of HIV and STIs? Do you know that people have accepted that to such a degree that whereas you would have had an unplanned pregnancy, but the pregnancy was wanted. It was unplanned, but it was not unwanted. And I think that has contributed as well. So, Dr. Lorde is right. It is very complex. There's no simple answer, but we have to find ways and means of addressing it nonetheless. I know I've carried you all around the world, but you're from St. Peter and I'm from St. Philip, so we're accustomed to that.
My final question, in fact, let me say though that even the Jewish religion practice this whole thing, polygamous marriages and things, you know, because of the same problem. They were a small community. My final question goes to Dr. Singh. And I have some respect for the science. I also believe science and religion do have a relationship. So my question to you is this. With all of these scientific developments, with all the development in technology, since we have a problem and since our people are living longer, is there a possibility, of people at 60 having children?
For males, we know that, you know, if you keep producing sperms for a longer time, but for women, we know that menopause definitely, you know, inhibits a woman to have her own children. But for women who, you know, have problems ovulating, you have donor ovum, donor eggs, and donor sperms. That's where you have your ART, artificial reproductive technology. So you can have a donor egg and you can have a donor sperm, which can be fertilized in vitro and through surrogacy. So obviously after 60, there would be hormonal challenges. So you would need a surrogate female. And I know of instances which is happening in certain countries. I have seen elderly individuals, for example, having deaths in their family. You know, the child, they would have had only one child. And because of some medical illness, the only child did not survive. And the couple, you know, are there in their late 50s and 60s, and, you know, they were very distressed because the only child couldn't survive. So they went out for ART with the help of surrogacy and, you know, sperm from the same father, but donated eggs. They have children and they have twins. So there are cases, so it is possible.
So there's hope.
With the help of artificial, yes, definitely there's hope. And there is research as well of uterus transplant, right? Uterus transplant research is happening now, so there might be a stage where, you know, you can carry on the pregnancy, though not ovulate. Artificial gametes are also being produced. That's a very, very high, we will, you know, take a lot of time to reach there, but this is happening. Production of artificial gametes, that is artificial eggs and artificial sperms. The research is happening already.
Thank you very much for your questions, Senator Morrison. Thank you very much for your responses. Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching the 22nd hour of the day. So I'm going to give the panelists the final words. I'm going to give you 1 minute and 30 seconds to make your closing remarks. I'm going to start over there. Great.
Okay, thank you, Sherwood. But I want to actually close by responding to the question that the Senator posed to Mr. Griffith in terms of whether there is some responsibility, whether the church had some role. Indirectly, yes. It's a sociological question. Naturally, yeah, the church is going to play the role that it would have played traditionally in terms of, you know, having child within the institution of marriage. Naturally, yes. It is historically, yeah. I mean, attitudes and mores change over time. So it wasn't a deliberate attempt, but naturally if persons feel a certain stigma, then yeah, I mean, it's either the case when if you actually follow the teachings of the church, then delayed marriage, you may be looking for a partner, and you're saying you're going to have a child within wedlock, and the later age in which you get married, then yes, you will have fewer children because you delayed marriage. Not necessarily the Anglican Church, but of course the Catholic Church has I don't know if the word to say it's a policy, but they don't believe in contraception. And so the role of contraceptives plays a part. So if persons are not, well, for reasons associated with practicing, safe sex and so on and so forth, but also at the same time, again, similarly believe, yes, the church teaches they should have children within a union, a married union, then yeah, that again contributes to a further delay in the age at which they would have children. But Barbadian society, I mean, it's strange. I mean, because it was only literally a generation before mine where they were large families. Like my mother was one of 13 children. My father, I don't even remember the number, but my point, you understand where I'm coming from. But I'm just saying that's literally the generation before me. So it goes from where my mother is one of 13 to now where it's like me, I'm having 3. And that's not dissimilar for a lot of persons my age, where their parents are very large families, 10 plus children. They're having 1, they're having 2. So the question is, what happened between when literally my parents, they were one of so many, but now us, the gap isn't even, it's not a gradual, it's literally a fall off. You're going from 13 to 2. You understand? The church has, yes, but I'm not ascribing, it's not blame, but all of these things center. And you asked an interesting question. You made me feel like I have to go and do some research on it. But that just speaks to the multidimensional way in which we're going to have to address the problem. The church it's a conservative institution, and so they're not going to go away from those sort of teachings. But the church operates in society, and so it cannot be divorced of the way the society that it lives in operates in. And so that means, along with the traditional way in terms of what it would say on Sundays, but it also has to have a role that is, let's say, more aligned with the way in which a counselor would approach these sort of questions. Yeah. You're not saying have children at 16 if you're unable to. You're not saying have children outside of wedlock. But you recognize, though, that when it happens, it's to reduce the stigma, to kind of reduce the sort of way in which persons view those persons. Bring them into church, encourage them, help them to, Oh boy, this was such a hard topic. I mean, I don't even know. But that's why I wrap up.
Thank you very much, Professor Lorde. Dr. Singh? Yeah.
My take would be, there has to be a balance. So we are in that stage where, more and more modernization is happening and people are leaving our traditional and old ways. So there has to be a balance between the tradition and the modern ways. And coming to the problem of infertility and ART, the research in the Caribbean among African women, African origin couples here, it was found that the major hindrance was access to the ART services in the islands. So there is very less, especially in the public system. We do have privatized clinics which offer ART, but they are very expensive. Everybody cannot afford it, right? So everything comes to the matter of cost. So we need to have these services in our public system where an average individual can go and access this. Number 2 would be, we cannot tell women that, stop studying. A lot of women are into jobs and education, and that's when they delay their pregnancy. So that's not a hindrance. So they can, there is a facility available where you can freeze your eggs, right, for a certain period of time. And then, you know, when the right time comes, when you meet the right partner, you can go ahead and, you know, thaw those eggs. So there is an option of embryo freezing your gametes, either your eggs or sperm. So this can be also utilized by those individuals who are suffering from cancer. Suppose you have a young male who has a cancer of his prostate or cancer of testis and has to go radiotherapy. And obviously those treatments are going to be negatively affecting his fertility. So what does he do? He wants to have a family after he, you know, gets treated. So you freeze your sperm, you freeze your egg for that time, and when you're ready to have, you can thaw it and then, you know, go for ART and have children. That is another point. My most important thing I wanted to stress is every time we speak about reproductive health, all the focus is on women. All the facilities in the society, concessions, low rate medicines, health concession, insurance services, everything for women, right? Right from the time we started about family planning, everything is focused on women. Men are really suffering. They feel that they are brave enough not to come forward with their complaints. No, they have an equal right as a woman, right? So we should have specialized health care for men suffering with infertility, destigmatize this condition, that it is as normal as a woman suffering from infertility, it's equal, not that he's the breadwinner of the family, that he cannot suffer from infertility. So that we need to destigmatize that and provide facilities and insurance coverage for male conditions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Mr. Griffith.
I would not need a minute, but I would say that tonight's discussion is a demonstration of the church's capacity to give leadership to the social development agenda confronting Barbados. I think we must continue to teach our religious issues, but we must broaden those issues to incorporate a number of social development issues that impact directly on the lives of people. I think we have the compassion and we know what we have to do to be your brother's keeper, but we need to go beyond the four walls of the church and find persons who in the society who are in need of assistance. So I want to commend the organization tonight for bringing us together, and I have no doubt that when Barbadians hear or see what we have discussed here tonight, it would make a tremendous impact. I think we can do it. We need to demonstrate the confidence, and this society really is dependent on us. We have led in the past, we're leading now, but we must accelerate and deepen that leadership within the society. We should rescue the perishing and care for the dying, and we should reach into the byways and the hedges and identify those persons who need our assistance. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffith. What an interesting way to end this panel discussion. The St. Michael Center for Faith and Action panel discussion, Populate or Perish, Barbados' population today and tomorrow. The in-panel body were Professor Troy Lorde, the economist and Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, Mr. George Griffith, a social worker, chairman of the Family Life Commission, the Church Mission Committee of the Diocese of Barbados, and Dr. Singh, the senior lecturer, Faculty of Medical Sciences of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. It has been a pleasure. Mr. Howell?
Thank you very much, Sherwood. Not Mr. Howell tonight. The role of vote of thanksgiver is being played by Faye Nurse, trustee, St. Michael Center for Faith and Action. But before I get to that task, I will present our panelists with a few gifts to demonstrate our sincere thanks to you for what you have done. You've put aside a lot of time to spend with us, and to give us some very insightful thoughts. And, we're going to leave here discussing and, thinking about how we can have a greater impact on our society. We thank you for this. I will present you with these gifts at this time. First of all, let me be old time and present the lady first. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. And last but not least, Mr. McCaskie. Thank you so much. I just want to say one more thing. I kind of got into the vote of thanks as I was presenting. So let me just add that we have a live stream going this evening. And I want to thank all of you who have come in person to support us and to be a part of our discussion and put forth those, very thought-provoking questions, keep the discussion interesting. But to our online viewers, thank you as well for joining us. I saw about 59 when I last checked. But I know that as people hear about this engaging session, the views will increase. And I am really thankful for the technology that allows us to spread the word far and wide. And I am thankful for the talents that have brought us to be presenting this festival forum to you. And on behalf of the chairman and the other trustees of St. Michael's Center for Faith and Action, I again thank you all. And I will invite you at this time to join us on the outdoors for some very light refreshments. Thank you and good night, and have a safe journey home when you do leave these premises.
I now invite you to stand as we bow our heads to pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this time together as we shared our wisdom and knowledge, as we engage in discussion. We thank you, Lord, for all that was shared, and as we prepare now to leave this place, but not your presence, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the sweet fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen. Do have a good night.